Okay, Dr. Haley, good morning. Today is Erev Shabbos, Parshas Re'eh, the yahrzeit of the Heilig Shabbos Rebbe, Chusayach and Elena Lachol Yisrael. We learned about a machlokes in our Mishnah between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon. Rabbi Eliezer holds anything that's mechuber lekarka, any keli that's for the house, that's mechuber lekarka, even if it was once not mechuber, even if it was made as a mobile keli and it was installed in the house, it's included with the house when the house is sold. While the Rabbanan held only something that was made out of part of the house. For instance, a machdeshes that was made because there was a block sticking out, and you kratzed out the block to make a machdeshes, that's what would be included in the house. But if you had a mobile machdeshes that was installed, that would not be included in the house. And the Gemara brings a brisa. Tanur Rabbanan, Tzinor Shechak Goy Ulubasayv Kavay. The Gemara goes into Hilchas Mikvahs. You have a pipe which is bringing the water into the mikveh, and it used to be independent keli, and then you built it into the ground. Poisalas or mikveh, that's considered a keli. Water that goes through it becomes mayim shuvim, and it will pass the mikveh. But kavay ulubasayv chakak, if you first put it into the ground, and only then did you make it into a keli, any poisalas or mikveh, it would not pass the mikveh. We'll be able to find you a shita of Rabbi Eliezer, and we'll be able to find you a shita of the Rabbanon that are not consistent with this halach. Zog to Gemara, hi Rabbi Eliezer. Which Rabbi Eliezer would you suggest does not stem with this price? Ilema Rabbi Eliezer the bias. If it's our Rabbi Eliezer who holds that any keli that was built into a home is considered mechuber karka, and is therefore included in the sale of a house, and that would not stem with this brisa, because this brisa says that chakakai or lebesayv kavai passes the mikvah, because it has the din of a mobile keli in the shuvim. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it should have a din of mechuber. But for the Gemara, you can't bring a raya from a psak that Rabbi Eliezer gave regarding what somebody includes in the sale of his property. You can't make a connection from there to the status, the halachic status of such a device, the Inyan Shuvim. Dilma Hanya Taima, maybe in our case, do you know why Rabbi Eliezer holds such a mechuber, a mobile zach that was installed, that why that mechuber is included in the sale of the house? Because Sovar Moicher Ben Yofa Moicher. It's all about the intention of the Moicher, and he wants to give everything over. Rabban Shavim Moicher Ben Yofa Moicher. But Lagabi, its status of a keli Lagabi Mikvois, his psak by Mechira should have no bearing on that. So that can't be, our Mishnah cannot be the source of a Rabbi Eliezer that argues on the brisa of Mikvois. The Elul Rabbi Eliezer the Kveres Devarim. Maybe it's Rabbi Eliezer of a beehive. A beehive is usually built separately, and then it is attached to the ground. Exactly what we're talking about. The Tnan we learned, if you have a beehive, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, it has the full status of karka. Because it's not prismal, you'd be able to write a prismal. If someone merely owns a kaveris, even though he owns no other land, we consider that land, and therefore, for this loan, a prismal can be written, and we will see in the Rashba more detail. The Eina Mekabelas Tuma Bimkoima. While it's connected, it's not Makabel Tuma. That's very relevant to us, because you clearly see here that something that was an independent keli that was then fastened to the ground is no longer Makabel Tuma. So you see, Lagabe Tuma is considered Mechuberes, while the brisa that we said earlier says Kavai is considered a keli. And the last halacha was since we consider it mechuber, taking honey from that hive on Shabbos is no different than plucking a peri from a tree, which is klisha, which would be chayiv. Achatas if it was done b'shoigig, it's a malacha deraisa. The Chachamim say not at all. Any karka, this does not have the status of karka, and therefore vein kaiser loy principle, and umekabelos tuma bim klema, and it would be mekabel tuma even while it's connected. And v'aroidim imenu b'Shabbos patur. So now let's have a look at Hilchos Prosbul. Why is it that you need karka in order to be able to write a prosbul? And specifically, the loiva needs to have karka to be able to write a prosbul. So let's take a quick peek in the Rashbam at the bottom of Samach Hemer base, which moves over onto our daf of Samach Bava Meral. Reika karka. L'chol dover. L'gabi all halachas it has a status of karka. Liyas niknis b'kesev u'b'shtaru v'chazaka, which is how you're koine karka. The liknis al gabi metaltlin. You could also be koine through kinyan agav. You can be koine metaltlin automatically when you make a kinyan on a behind. V'lichta v'lei prosbul kilu karka. And you can write a prosbul on it just as if it is karka. Ditnam b'mesech shviyas perak achron. In koshin prosbul el ala karka. You cannot write a prosbul unless the loiva has karka. The im ein loy. What if you're a malva and you want to write a prosbul because you don't want to lose your money over shemitah? So the halach is mizaka b'soich sadeu. The malva can be mizaka to the loiva, a small piece of property, so that this way the malva will be able to write the prosbul. L'shama farish. What is the reasoning for prosbul? Prosbul is bypassing the mitzvah of shemitah. Why would they create a loophole to bypass the mitzvah of shemitah? The teretz is because what was the purpose of shemitah? Because Rebbeinu Shalom is money from us. In and of itself, giving a yid a loan is a big mitzvah. It's a big chesed. It's a risk. That's a sacrifice. But Hashem wanted to push us to a greater level of sacrifice, and Hashem wanted us to also be moichel and yichoiv that shemitah hits. You know what? Klal Yisrael couldn't do it, and because they couldn't do it, they weren't even willing to do the basic lower level of chesed of lending money because they didn't want to lose their money. So not only did this push to have a higher level of chesed not work, it's going to cause now that we're not even going to do a lower level of chesed that we would have otherwise been willing to do. Why? They didn't have that high level of chesed that they were able just to walk away from a loan. And because of that, they didn't lend at all. And therefore, Omar Hillel, his personal. Hillel said, we have to stop the bleeding. At least let people continue to lend. Prois means revach. We're giving you some breathing room. And bull means Ashirim. Isn't it funny that Ashirim is called bull? Just saying. Kamoi. Elu Rashai Buloi Shabihuda Klemer Revach Lashirim. They left some breathing space. So Gvir Shalai Afsidu Shalahem that they shouldn't lose what they're going to lend out, or maybe it means they shouldn't lose at least the madrega that they would be otherwise willing to lend. Okay, Gavalt Utanana we learned. Guvoy, I once heard over a story that Irving Bunim, who was the president of Young Israel, I think he was the first president of Young Israel. He was also very close to Rabbaran. He followed Rabbaran. The book about Irving Bunim is really a book about Rabbaran because it talks about what they did together. And he was once made a parliament. What a parliament used to be is one gvir would invite over maybe 5-10 gvirim to his house, and they would talk about what that was needed, and then everyone would pledge some money. Eventually, it became liberalized, and anyone who makes more than $10 is a gvir. So therefore, everybody gets invited to parliament. But what he said was, is there's 5 very wealthy, maybe 10 very wealthy there about this meeting. Moshe Reichman was there, and he said, today I have invited the upper crust of Jewish society to discuss this Moshe. What is a crust? We're the upper crust. What is the definition of crust? Crust is a poor billige brekelach, couple of cheap crumbs that's held together with a lot of dough. But Tanan, Guvay Shal Prusbul, the nusach of the Prusbul is Moshrani Lachem, I'm giving over to you, Ploini Uploini Dayonim, you 2 Dayonim, you 3 Dayonim, I'm giving you over my chayv, Shabbamakam Ploini, this is where you're the die now. Shekol chayv sheyesh li etzel Ploini, any chayv that Reuven owes me, Shagvenu, I should be able to collect it, holds them on She'erza as long as I would want. And the Dayanim sign or the Edom sign. So what happens now? How does this bypass Shmita? There's still a deraisa that says, "Lo yigosh." The hilchach mishamasosh the rice of the bezdin the gvoisam. If I give it to bezdin to collect, the iu loy kagavi, I'm not collecting like Karina Beliga. I'm not approaching anybody to collect. The bezdin is approaching them to collect. So therefore, it's a way of me getting my money, because it doesn't say the chayv is over. It says you're not allowed to collect it. I'm not collecting it. The bezdin is collecting it for me. Did I yonin kamagavaloi? The hefker is hefker. And even if technically it belongs to the oni, through hefker bezdin has the right to reallocate money. However, bezdin didn't just do it willy-nilly. They only did it under certain circumstances where their intrusion into our lives with hefker and hefker is kept to a minimum. And therefore, they only made it takana if the loiv has karka. Why? The dami ki'ilu yesh l'mal. It's if a loiv has karka, which means assets that it's easy to collect from, we look at it as if the malva has a mashkin. And if I have a mashkin, there is no halacha of shmita, because I'm not collecting from you. You're coming to me to redeem your mashkin. If a mashkin l'shaychli, why can't they do it even without karka? They have the ability through hefker bez and hefker to make it work even without karka. And here's a key. They want to keep their intrusion to a minimum. So they limit it to when there's a loan with karka, where anyway, maybe even without their involvement, you'd be able to collect because it would be considered like you have a mashkin. So there they sort of pushed it over the edge and they said that you can collect. This is what I think is pshat. But what I heard from my grandfather Rashi, something very interesting, different. The higher timer, you know why they didn't make this takana if the loiva doesn't have karka? Because the stam loiva ain't regilin al voisai elam ken yosh lekarka lishtavid lamal. It's very unlikely that someone without any karka would succeed in even securing a loan. It's such a rarity that someone with no karka would even get a loan. And therefore, where do they make this takada of principle? That's for common things that occur, like loans when the loiva has property. If this person has no karka, there's such a small chance that he'll even be able to get a loan. The Rabbanan don't busy themselves with such rare situations. That's a fascinating approach. Also, Rabbi Eliezer said, if a loiva merely has a bi, custom principle, you'd write a principle for that. You would have thought, even though it has a status of kaka, legabi other halachas, but legabi hachtakana, but legabi principle like cheshiva kaka, that's not something that their brother would make a principle for. Because why is it gavav? Because it can't run away. Kaka can't run away. It's sort of pretty secure that the mob will be able to collect. But this biyav can so easily be dislodged and become mobile. So maybe that wouldn't count for a principle. Whose land is it connected to? It could be connected to anybody's land. I don't know.
Then it's not land. I mean, it's not his land. I don't understand the how.
It's a maskana. It's considered land.
It is land.
Yeah.
Even though it's not necessarily his land underneath it.
Correct.
So if you took like a fire hydrant and cemented it into the ground, like that would be okay.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah, that's the massive chiddush of kaveris.
Even though you don't own the land, it's connected.
That's right. The kaveris is the only land that I have.
Squatting on somebody else's land with your beehive.
Or it could be in a symptom. It could be in a public
place.
Yeah.
You can take your beehive, you can slip it into the park, and that's
so you tell me you can take your beehive and shove it.
Right.
Into the park.
And then you can, that's enough. That's
right.
But only for this.
No, for everything. It's not makabel tuma either.
Okay, that's like
that for that it doesn't matter whose cock it is. Right. Okay. Zog to Gemara weiter. The Eine Mekabelas Toma Zua Kaveris from Koiba, of course, while it's still connected. Keeping the Mechuberis Hila Karka, Yotam Ataris Kli. It's not called a keli. It's not mobile. The Gama Dvash Shabasoicha Einim Akabal Tuma, the Batla Gaba Kaveris. Even if Tuma touched the honey, while the honey is in the beehive, it will not become Tuma. The Dafka Bim Klemer. That's only when the honey is in the hive. Aval not Lamisham, but if you took honey out of the beehive, now it's a standalone independent Michael. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter.
Okay, what's the honey there? If you have a plant
Something that's
ground,
mechubel l'karka, a fruit while it's on a tree cannot become
right,
tummy.
and you cut it off, and now it's not.
Then it becomes tummy. Oh, so you want to know what the chiddush is? So let's go back here. Good. It's exactly the Rishbam is thinking that that's going to bother you because command Amar b'perek hamerchas esfina loiboy machshava. You don't need a machshava to say I'm specifically want to make it now into a meichel. The ikaman the matrich machshava. There is a sheet who holds that unless you specifically have kavana to make it into a meichel, it will still not be mekabel.
That's by Torah.
So the Rishbam is directly addressing the kasha that you asked, and the Rishbam anticipated exactly when you would ask the kasha. And that's why he puts it in right here. Yeah. The hilchach itzur chacha gabei tuma lemisni b'mkoyma who adin l'chol hanachmi, and so and as well for the other reasons why, or for other purposes that this affects. V'aroy demimena means to take the honey out. Kishibim koyma while it's stationary. Dainu makoim giduloi shel davash. You're uprooting the honey from the place where it grew. Chayiv chatos, we will treat it like a deraisa, ketoilesh minakarka, as if you were tearing a fruit out of the ground. Alma l'Rabbi Eliezer. So what do you see from here? That according to Rabbi Eliezer, chakaku l'bsoif kava, if it was originally a mobile keli that was then installed in the ground, kekarka mashvili, we treat it like karka. Ubraisa dolil like Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore the brisa of tzina shechakaku l'bsoif kava, which considers it a keli, won't be consistent with this Rabbi Eliezer. Umiyu hanach rabbanani. The rabbanon in our brisa here, who holds it's not called mechuber, could quite easily agree with the tzina shechakaku l'bsoif kava. So we only succeeded in finding the Rabbi Eliezer that doesn't agree with the brisa of tzina shechakaku. The rabbanon will still find, but right now we only have found the Rabbi Eliezer. Because the Rabbanan of Rabbi Eliezer here by Kaveris would actually correspond perfectly with what the Brisa said. Because that's exactly what we're talking about. It's Chakal B'Soif Kavoi, and in fact, the Rabbanan hold is considered Keli. Okay. Eina Kakarka, Dr. Rashbam, Yishum Nechiber B'Karka, just because you installed it in the ground, Leibotul Taris Kli Minha. It doesn't lose its status of a Keli, and therefore, Umekabel Tuma, even B'Kaima, even while it's connected to the ground, become advash. The loyboy machshava, the vash will be tummy. Doesn't need machshava. Kidatanya lekamon ba merchas. Zok to Gemara, you don't have a right in the case of kaveris. It's also a different svara than the svara of tzina shechak. Zok to Gemara, pasam. Maybe the reason why Rabbi Eliezer considers it mechuber lekarka is because of a pasuk in Nofi. The Amar Rabbi Eliezer, taima the Amar Rabbi Eliezer. I'm sorry. The reason for Rabbi Eliezer is because of the explanation that Rabbi Elazar gave. So Rabbi Elazar the Amoira explained the shita of Rabbi Eliezer the Tam. Rabbi Elazar, my time with Rabbi Eliezer, it says Yonason dipped his stick into a beehive and had some honey. My yar hatoilish mimenu b'Shabbos chayiv. You see, the pasuk is comparing the devash to a forest. The yar means a forest, just like a forest. If you're toilish, if you tear a leaf off, a branch off a tree on Shabbos, you're going to be chayiv, chatos, because it's a malacha deraisa. After vash, so too taking the vash is like it's pulling a fruit out of a forest. So maybe there's a special reason by a beehive. Maybe beehives have a special status. The Torah or the Navi and Shmuel specifically addresses honey as being considered mechuber. But every other keli that you connected to the ground might not necessarily be mechuber. So you don't have a raya from this Rabbi Eliezer that it contradicts the brisa of tzina shechakos and kavai. So we're back to square one. We don't yet know of a Rabbi Eliezer whose shita contradicts this price. Now, this whole story of the Yaris Tavash was a very interesting story. What happened was they were fighting the Plishtim, and Shaul HaMelech said that nobody's allowed to eat anything until we're completely finished the war at the end of the day. And what happened was Yonis and his own son didn't hear Shaul say this because he had broken off on his own to do something else in battle. He found some people that he wanted, some Plishtim to attack, so he had already separated from the main camp. And then when they started coming together in the middle of the day, there was a Yaris Tavash there. He stuck his stick into it, and that's in front of everybody. And everybody said, "Oops, you're not allowed to eat it." But now, Yonason was Chayiv Misa because he violated the Chayim of his father. But what happened was Klal Yisrael came to his defense, and every Motzei Shabbos in Vayitin Lecha, we quote what Klal Yisrael said to prevent any harm from coming to Yonason. Let me see if I can find it. It's in Vayitin Lecha, so I'll just pull it out. This is what Klal Yisrael said. Hada b'shalom nafshi. We ask Hashem to redeem us. Because I'm with the rabbim. And here's the pasuk. And the nation told Shaul, Yonason Yamus. Yonason, you're going to suggest should die? It was his maneuver that actually won the war on behalf of Eden. Chalila. Klal Yisrael told Shaul, no way. Chai Hashem, we're going to swear to Hashem, we're going to protect Yonason. We won't let a hair on Yonason be touched. He was working with the Rebbeinu Shloim because look at how he turned the war over for us, and we won because of him. But Yivtu Amos Yonason, they redeemed him below mace, and in fact, Shaul had to be matar neder because Klal Yisrael was going to stand in his way from harming Yonason in any way. So, fact Gemara once again, who is the Rabbi Eliezer that argues on the brisa of Tzinor Shechakim? Zok to Gemara. Let's try this one. Rabbi Eliezer the daf. Rabbi Eliezer that was speaking about a daf, a platform board that was built into the wall. So you first smooth out a board. It was like a tzina shechakakai, and then you connected it to the wall. And the shaila is, was it used by bakers to put their bread on to cool off, or was it used as a rack to display their bread? But it was used to put bread on by bakers. The Tanan we learned Dav Shel Nachtumim, a board that the Nachtumim keep bread on, Shekavai B'Koisel, that was fastened to the wall. At this point, I said board, meaning there's a connotation that it's made out of wood. So it's like a pshut kliyet, because it's not a keli, it's just a board. Rabbi Eliezer Matar, Rabbi Eliezer knows that's called tar. Why? Because it's mechov lakarka. The chachamim etamim and the chachamim hold it tamim. So here you have a great example of side Rabbi Eliezer would be arguing on the brayso of Tzina Shechakakai and side the chacham. Why? Because mani. Who are you going to suggest between this machloikas of Rabbi Eliezer and the chachamim holds like the brayso of Tzina Shechakakai? Mani. Rabbi Eliezer. If it's Rabbi Eliezer, even if you first prepared the board, made it into a keli, and then you mounted it on the wall, it would still considered to be mechuber, and it would be tar. But the Brisa says is tame. It's a keli. And Rabbanon, and if you want to say Rabbanon here by Dav Shal Nachtoimim agrees with the Brisa, you have a problem because I feel kavay ulubsoif chagakai nami. The Rabbanon hold it's tame even if you were kavay it first, because by Dav Shal Nachtoimim shekavay b'koisel. The Chacham didn't say it's tame only if you first made it into a keli and then you connected it to the wall. He says across the board, every da shel nachtaimim is going to be Tamei no matter what, no matter how it was done. So here you have a Rabbi Eliezer and a Rabbanon whose shittas both disagree with the Brisa. Rabbi Eliezer crosses the Brisa because he holds even if it was made into a keli first and then mounted, it would still be tahar. And the Rabbanon are crossing the Brisa because they hold even if it was part of the karka and you made a keli out of it, you fastened the keli out of it, it still would be considered a keli, which once again doesn't jive with the Brisa. Zoktimar, this is not a good raya either. Because La'ilam Rabbi Eliezer, let's say that our Brisa does stem with Rabbi Eliezer. The shiny pshute kliyetz. So here we're talking about pshute kliyetz, which means a kliyetz that cannot hold any water. It's flat. It's a flat board. Midaraisa, that's not tamei. The tumah derabbanan. It's only tamei midarabanan. We're soon going to see that could be it's not even tamei midarabanan either. There's a long toises about it that a pshute kliyetz is not even tamei midarabanan. No maskala. But right now, the Gemara wants to suggest maybe Pshut kliyetz is only tamei midarabanan. Therefore, Rabbi Eliezer said if it's connected to a wall, it's going to be tar and gans. But she'iva is a psul daraisa. Ma'im she'uvim is possibly daraisa. There, Rabbi Eliezer, of course, will be more machmer and hold that if it's chak kavoi, it's a keli pass. Correct the Gemara machlal the shiva daraisa. Your whole premise to make Rabbi Eliezer jive with the brisa is if you hold that the psul of ma'im shuvim is daraisa. But that is not true. First of all, we know that Ma'im Shuvim is only Midirabbanan. Here's a long Rashi and Tosfos on this, because there's shittas who hold that even if the entire mikveh is only made up of Ma'im Shuvim, it will still be only possible Midirabbanan. But there's shittas Rashbam and some other Rishonim are is that when do we say Ma'im Shuvim is Midirabbanan? That's only if you have already some water in the mikveh. You don't have 40 saw yet, and you're adding to it Mayim Shuvim, that will only be possible with Rabbanan. But if from scratch you've only started it with Mayim Shuvim, then it will be possible with Rais. Okay? V'oit. So at least by the case of mikveh shanim, that we're assuming that there was some water in the mikveh first, and you're just adding to the mikveh. So there, it's only Asher Midrabbanan at most. So your whole shita that Rabbi Eliezer would be more machmer by the case of mikveh doesn't make any sense at all. V'oid, Rabbi Yosy ben Rab Chanina, b'daf shel matchis machloikis. They're not arguing about pshutei kliyetz because everybody knows that pshutei kliyetz is in fact not tamei at all. So the daf shel nachtoimen, where we just quoted this machloikis between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan, is speaking by metal, where there's a tumah daraisa. So it's exactly the opposite. Here, Rabbi Eliezer holds even by a tumah deraisa of daf shel machtoim, kavoi will be tahar, meaning it's not a keli; it's considered mechubla karka. So by a derabbanan of she'uvin, for early that shouldn't pass on the mikveh. So it's exactly the opposite of the teretz. You wanted to give a teretz that the mikveh is deraisa and that daf shel machtoim is derabbanan. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. Daf shel machtoim is deraisa and the mikveh is derabbanan. Zok to Gemara, checkmate. Rabbi Eliezer will not stim with the Mishnah because Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's going to be mechubel karka, and the brisa by mikveh says it's not considered mechubel karka. So at least we now found the Rabbi Eliezer that does not stim with the brisa. We still haven't found the Rabbanan that doesn't stim with the brisa. So for the other Rabbanani, we're going to have to say that the Rabbanan of Dav Shal Nachtumim does jive with the brisa of Tzina Shechakal Kavod. The problem is the Rabbanan say regardless, even if it was Kavod L'B'Sof Chakakai, it's also Tamei by Dav Shal Nachtumim. Yet by the brisa it says it's not a problem if it's Kavod L'B'Sof Kavod. Teretz is B'Shani Shiva the Rabbanan. The whole Shaila of Ma'im Shuvim, like we just said, is only Rabbanan. There, the Rabbanan are mekel, and if it was kavod l'b'sev chakakai, they'll consider it mechubah. But the gabi tumah deraisa by a daf shel nachtoimen, the question of tumah deraisa, there, even if it was kavod l'b'sev chakakai, the Rabbanan holds that it's not considered mechubah. Frek the Gemara, if that's the case, so shiva is the Rabbanan. But iachi afilu chakakai l'b'sev kavod nan. They shouldn't make such a distinction. Why? Zok Rishpam, Ihagid l'Rabbanan, Akol Shava. It doesn't make a difference. Ben Kavay v'Acha Chagagoy, or Ben Chagagoy v'Acha Kavay. Nevertheless, it's loy bottle l'gabe karka. We say that the keli is not bottled to the ground. Chashav kli gover is considered a keli. The gabe she'iva, and you only want to suggest that by ma'im shuvin, since it's the rabbanon, hu da kiloi levatle agav karka. There he was makel to say, since it was kaveh first and then chagagoy, we'll say it's bottled to the karka. But that's not a good svar for Gemara, because afilu chagagoy ulu b'soiv kaveh nami lo yifsel mikveh the liftel agav karka. If you're going to say there's a kula, there shouldn't make a difference. If you're makel, the rabbanon doesn't see a distinction between kaveh ulu b'soiv chagagoy and chagagoy b'soiv kaveh. They don't acknowledge there's a difference. So if you're machmer on everything by a deraisa, you should be mekel on everything by a derabbanon. But there is no distinction to be made according to the rabbanon between the two. So tomorrow there is a difference. Shiny hasam the ika Torah is clear love. If there was a Torah is clear love while it was not yet connected to the ground, that looks very bad. And only there would they have, even though normally they don't make that distinction, but it looks bad, and therefore there they wouldn't be made. Zok the Halil Rashbam, Mishani Hasam the Kataris clear love, the whole Kachle Rotzalahaka. To be makel when you literally have a keli, standalone keli, to say that it's going to be tar, it's not going to be the time of the mikveh, that's too much. The Ein Lach Shiva Gedolim Mizu, that's Mama Shiva. You have a keli. Hoil Bahava Shem Clear Leh, Hoidim Shogva Bakak. The Loi Chashvis Le Keli, Batlak Zerasam Lagamri. If you wouldn't consider that a keli, so then there's no such thing as shuvim, because every keli is not really a keli. So therefore, they make that distinction. So at the end of this sugya, the Gemara was really only looking for a Rabbi Eliezer that does not correspond with the brisa of Tina Shchakai, because now that we found a Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara abandons this whole parsha, and the Gemara is not looking. Okay, let's see where we could find the shita of a Rabbanon that would disagree with this brisa. We don't have. Rabbi Yosef, what happens with Mega Shaman? If you had rainwater, now normally the halacha is that if you have peiros, they're not makabel tuma until they become wet, but it's not enough that to rain on them. It has to be water that the balabayis is happy with. Let's say he didn't want his fruits to get wet. He wanted them to stay dry. He was drying them. He's actually upset that it got wet. Those fruits will not become hukshel kavatoma unless the water was water that the bailam wanted. So what happens here if water fell into an istrabulin, which we said is the stationary part of some type of grinder? He wanted that to get rinsed out. So when it rained on it, that water is water that the bailam wanted. And then that water dripped onto fruit. That's also called a rotten. Rishbam tells us it's not like the water has to drip on the pears and I want it on the pears. As long as I want the water for any keli, that water afterwards, if it falls on the pears, even though I don't want it to fall on the pears, the water is still going to be matched to the pears. But it only works if the water fell on a keli that I'm happy about. But if it fell onto a mechubel karka that I'm happy about, that doesn't count. So now the question is, would the istrabulin, which is installed, would that be considered mechuber or not mechuber? So the Rishbam explains, and there's a big machlokes Tosfos and the Rishbam how to explain this. The Rishbam explains that the shaila isn't only by an istrabulin, and we're talking, and the rabbanon that we're asking about are not the rabbanon of daf shal nachtumen. Because the Daf Shel Nachtumen Rabbanon clearly says it's considered not mechubel karka. We're talking about the Rabbanon in our Mishnah. The Rabbanon that argued on our Mishnah, who said that a machteshes that's built in is considered not mechubel karka, and it's not sold with the property, unless the machteshes was built out of a block that was already part of the house. Right? That's what the Rabbanon said. Rabbi Levi said anything that's built in doesn't make a difference if it was once loose, that was installed, that's part of the house. But the Rabbanon don't know. Something that was installed in the house, but it was originally built as a standalone item, that is not included with the house. So the Rabbanon, who when it comes to Mechira, makes a distinction between something that's installed and they don't consider it built in, and therefore maybe the same way they don't consider it built in lagabe me selling it, maybe they also don't consider it built in lagabe water. And maybe if water fell on any one of these kalim that were originally built loose and then they were built in, maybe the Rabbanon would agree that that water is good to be mach. So therefore, make sham shechishav aleim ladich es trublun as it's trublin mal is royim. Would it be machshir's royim? Alibud Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah, that says kol ha'mechubel karka harei karka loyti boila. It's not a shayla. It's considered mechubel karka. The water that falls on it, even if I don't want the water to fall on it, it's like it fell on the davar mechubel karka. It won't be machshir's royim. But kitiboy lachalivu the Rabbanon who legabi mekach umemkar considered it not mechuber because they hold it doesn't get sold together with the house. Maybe it would be considered not mechuber legabe being machshir's royim legabe water falling on this item with my agreement with I'm happy that it fell on there. That would be considered as if it fell on metal. I'll leave it there on the Amr Enik Akaka Mai. What would Allah be? Zok to Gemara Teku. The Gemara remains with the Teku. But the Rashbam explains if the Shaila really is on all type of things that were loose and then built in. So why is the question Dafka by its trouble? And why was it presented Dafka by its trouble? So the Rashbam tells us, and that is because where did the Rabbanan make the distinction between how it was built? Dafka by the machteshes. So you see clearly that the machteshes is something that he holds is not so, it's considered not so connected to the property. But it is Strublin, he agrees with Rabbi Eliezer that it's considered mechuber because it is included. So he considers even in Strublin, which he considers more mechuber, maybe still it's considered a keli and it's considered not mechuber. So that if I wanted it to get wet, that water should be considered as having fallen on a tolush, on a keli that's not mechuber, and therefore it would make the water eligible for being machshir's royim. Shalach le Rab Nechemia bareid Rab Yosef l'Rabba bareid Rab Huzuti. Rab Nechemia, the son of Rab Yosef, sent a letter to Rabba, the son of little Rav Huna, Linarda to Narda, and he told him the following: Ki asi hach itzala kamach. There's a woman who's getting married, and there's a rule that even though it's not in the Tanakh Suba, but there's a rule that if a father dies and leaves over assets, the girls, the single girls, when they get married, are entitled to take 10% of the assets that are left over. That means they're taking them away from their brothers. They're allowed to take that out of the estate because they need money to start a household. They need money for nothing. They need money to pay for their expenses. They're entitled to 10%. So what Rav Yosef sent, the Chemi Rav Yosef sent, that Agba Isser Nichsi Afilu Me'itztrubli Derechayim. When you're now these assets of the estate, that 10% of them are allocated to daughters so they can get married, that's only assets that are karka, that are mechubel karka. But it doesn't apply to loose metalkli. So he told him that even from its trubli derechayim you can extract money from, because I'm going to consider that mechubel karka for the purposes of taking 10% to the girls. Amar Bashi, Kavina Berav Kahana, Makvidin Afilu Me Almadabat. Even if they own the property that they rented out and they got rent from it, so the rent is for sure metaltlin, I consider the rent karka, that even that will be meshubed to pay these girls their 10%. So frek toishes, I don't understand. It's regular cash. How could you possibly consider that mechubel karka? So toishes on daf samach zayin about it. Me amla dabati bim toimer hechadami. What is exactly the case? Ikvar boss chiris liyara achin. If the cash is here already, how could that be justified as karka? Im kain metaltlin inu. These are pure metaltlin. Of course, we wouldn't be able to take from that to give the 10% to the girls to get married. And if you're telling me that the chiddush is that you could rent out a property to raise money to pay for her nadin, Pshita, of course. Why would you think otherwise? They could even sell this property for a nab. Surely they can rent it out. So what is the chiddush over here? And for Toshus Yeshleimar, to go into Skira Abayis Lashana. They had rented it out for a year. That was the term. And the rule here is Ein Schiris Mishtalamis El Besoy. Ukvar Avar Chati Isman, half of the year passed. So you consider half of the rent already cash, even though you didn't receive it, but it's owing already and not property. Kamash alone, Tafilu Schiris Mizman Sha'avar Tito. She could even be entitled to some money from money that already was due because half of the term already passed, so there's already money accruing. The Einas Schiris Mishtalamis El Besoy. Halachically, we don't consider the chiyuv to pay rent to come until the end of the term, and therefore v'ladami lo metalton is not metalton. Therefore, she can collect from it to collect from for her 10% of that. Okay, we'll stop here. We will be mamshich tomorrow. For coming.